It has long been stated that indie games are one of the most important parts of the games industry, and that is pretty much objectively true. Indie games have had a massive impact on the industry in the past and will continue to in the future. And while mainstream AAA games continue to get more and more bland, and we get more exposure of what some of these big companies are really like, indie games will always be there to expand what is possible in this medium and to show us why video games are great in the first place. So, in this video, I decided to do a special shout out to 3 indie games I find underrated. If you're really into the medium and have lots of knowledge on indie games, you probably will have heard of some of these 3. I'm not going to pretend they're that unique. You don't have to buy them off a flash drive from a creepy old man on the street to play them, but they still are cool games. They still are pretty underrated, and I still do wish people would talk about them a little more. Titan Souls is the type of game where it's really easy to make a judgment about what it will be like based on its presentation and its influences. I mean, it's called Titan Souls. It literally has an achievement called Shadow of the Colossus. They didn't even change the name. But that in no way means this game isn't unique. The style is pretty similar to Shadow. You have a beautiful open world, only in 2D pixel art this time. You have to travel around and find and defeat bosses. The difference is, you have one single arrow, which you can pick up, and the bosses are piss hard until they're piss easy. Let me explain. When you first get into a boss, it's really difficult. You die in a single hit, but it only takes a few attempts to spot a really obvious weak point, like an eye or a Yeti's ass. So it's easy to figure out how to defeat bosses. Only you have an extremely narrow opportunity to do so. And the bosses, once you hit their weak point, die in one hit, just like you. This creates a really fun gameplay loop where you have to be extremely cautious and always aware of what's going on the screen. But when you do manage to get a shot in, it feels cathartic. And you just win. When you defeat an enemy, usually it only takes 10 or 20 minutes at most, but something about the simplicity with how you beat them feels satisfying, but also emotional. Like, they're human too. In every encounter, you have to be the aggressor by shooting the Titan to wake it up, which makes it feel tragic when they go down as simple as you. Some of the boss patterns and ideas are really intelligently designed as well. My favorite is the mushroom that can make you high if he hits you. And, of course, that Yeti. When I shot that Yeti in the ass, and I got an achievement that was a picture of a Yeti butt, I knew at that moment any doubts I had about the future of video games as a medium are unfounded. It's perfect. The game is really quick. It only took me about 3 hours to get through, and it has no actual narrative beyond environmental storytelling. So if you're looking for a shorter experience you can still really immerse yourself into, you have to play this one. I've always found it a bit unfortunate that arcade-style games are a genre no big companies really invest that much in more, besides remakes of older titles. That doesn't count. But hey, that's what indie games are for, and I think one of the greatest examples of this is Anton Deluxe. The gameplay is pretty simple. It's like Breakout, but you control a character who can jump and hit the ball, as well as body chuck the ball to make it go faster. And it is just as addicting as its predecessors. I'm sure you all are aware of how satisfying it is to get a ball behind the blocks in Breakout, or even just to do good in Breakout, and that is all here in spades, because that feeling is amplified when you have full control over a character's actions and some special moves, rather than just left to right. The game is also broken up into separate stages, which all have their own level design, which is an approach I really like, because being able to actually beat an arcade-style game gives me a much more incentive to play and makes it much more enjoyable, in my opinion. It also means some of the stages can be more cleverly designed to challenge or even work around the strengths of the player. If this game had actually released in the 80s, it would have absolutely blown up. Now, as for the actual presentation of the game, it's great. The graphics are a slick 16-bit, meaning, okay, it would blow up in the 80s anyways, but that's not what I mean. And it captures a certain style I haven't really seen done before in many other games. We do have cutscenes to flesh out some very basic story, which is fine. I didn't ask for a good story. and our protagonist is Anton, who is a redder version of Wario. We also have Nina, the closest we are ever getting to Wa Peach, which is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you see it. There's actually a lot of characters here, which gives the game a lot of replay value, even if they don't play too differently. Just don't try to unlock them all, because you would actually die in real life if you did that. It's also a pretty funny game. One of the characters is Anton Ball, and there are lots of balls jokes. It's funny. But seriously though, the way the characters in the game are modeled and play is all very unique, and it makes this game more than just an arcade game. For my last pick on this list, I'm going with something that I think has a little bit less polish than the last two, and is more obscure, but some of the highs soar way higher than the previous two games. It's called Will a Wonderful World. You play as a god who accepts letters from people who believe in you and need your help for various things. The gameplay has you switch around the order of sentences in these letters. Whatever you change in the letter changes what happens in reality. So it's up to you to help these people get better lives and change their fate. There are 13 different characters who write letters to you over the course of the game. Some of them know each other, and some live in completely different countries from each other, but they're all connected in some way. Also, one of them's a cat. How does the cat write letters? Well, it just writes whatever, instantly gets translated, delivered to the gods. Honestly, great explanation. Anyways, you find out pretty quickly that the nature of these letters means some tragedy is bound to happen, no matter what you do. So the game turns into a situation where you want to choose whichever option is the lesser evil. Not every letter is tragic, though. They can range from, I have a gun pointed at me right now and I'm going to die, to, I have to beat a kid at the world's most unsubtle parody in the world. The gameplay is actually really addicting at times. It's essentially a word puzzle game. When sentences are mixed around, the meanings of certain words can be recontextualized, and the subjective verbs can be changed too, drastically changing the events of the story. There are also lots of possible paths, meaning lots of opportunities are available to shift up what happens. Sometimes the solutions can be pretty cheap and forced, which is a pretty big flaw of the games at times. But when you consider that this game uses a lot of nuances of the English language and wasn't originally written in English, it makes it more impressive. I imagine they didn't exactly have a big budget to translate it with, too. All things considered, it's a miracle the translation is as good as it is. And it more than excuses the dialogue being a little wooden at times. As for the stories, they're great, but they have some significant flaws with them, unfortunately. Each character is memorable and pretty likable, mostly, so it's not them I have a problem with. What I do have issues with is the serious tonal shifts that can occur throughout the game. Seriously, some of the stories deal with subject matter that's absolute worst a human being could be. Things like murder, rape, torture, pedophilia, and things like that are discussed extensively and even crucial to the plot. Given that you're constantly receiving letters from people who these things are happening to, it can make it extremely depressing at times. But also, the more light messages I talked about can be mixed in with those, which unintentionally creates a gross tone at some times when some subjects that are happening in one story can be sort of joked about in another. For example, there's a plotline in one character's story related to a false accusation of him molesting children with an obviously fake tabloid magazine that spread the story. So the story is played for laughs, which feels pretty inappropriate, especially given the other stories in this game discuss this topic with the full severity that it deserves. There's always a weird tonal shift when you're in a light story and move on to a seriously heavy one with absolutely no warning. This part goes without saying, but if you're not comfortable with those heavy topics I mentioned before, this game's not for you. If you can look past it though, there's a lot of good stuff here. And later on the story even questions if you have the right to change people's fates like this, and what potential consequences such a thing could have in real life. No spoilers, of course. There's also a backstory behind the god and how you came to do this. It's not the greatest, but it's there. Okay, but seriously, they call this game Prince of Fighters, and the characters are named Kusanagi and Yogami. You changed one vowel of these fictional characters' names. How did you get away with this? So, I think your main takeaway from this video should be, there's no broad lesson from this video. What you need to know is that Titan Souls is cool, Anton Deluxe is cool, and Will, A Wonderful World is cool. There's not about the broader subject of indie games being seen as lesser than AAA titles, how some games get underappreciated. You better not take any really important morals from this, no. It's just about how these games are cool. You will play at least one of these games right now, or I will find you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.